There we go. 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 Hello, everyone. I'm Miriam Bale, and I'm the Artistic Director of Indie Memphis. Hello, everyone. I'm Miriam Bale, and I'm the Artistic Director of Indie Memphis. Welcome to Indie Talks, presented by the Hohenberg Foundation. I'm Miriam Bale, and I'm the Artistic Director of Indie Memphis. Welcome to Indie Talks, presented by the Hohenberg Foundation. I'm Miriam Bale, and I'm the Artistic Director of Indie Memphis. Welcome to Sorry for the delay there. I'm Miriam Bale, and I'm the Artistic Director of Indie Memphis. Welcome to Indie Talks, presented by the Hohenberg Foundation. We are very pleased to have a talk with A.S. Hamra and the directors of the wonderful documentary Polystyrene, I Am a Cliché. I'll introduce A.S. Hamra, otherwise known as Scott Hamra. He is the film critic for The Baffler and the author of The Earth Dies Streaming, film writing 2002 to 2018 from N+1 Books, which New York Magazine called one of the 10 best books of 2018. He also has a film that he produced in Indie Memphis this year called Bunker. Hello, Scott, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So I will bring in our filmmakers if you'd like to introduce them now.
Okay, talking with me today for Indie Memphis are Celeste Bell and Paul Sung, the co-directors of Polystyrene, I Am a Cliché, which is a documentary about Celeste's mother, the great lead singer and songwriter of X-Ray Spex, who recorded and released the album Germ-Free Adolescence in 1978 in London after the famous single, Oh Bondage, Up Yours. I'm very happy to welcome both Celeste and Paul today.
Hi, Scott.
Hi.
Thank you.
So I've seen the film a couple of times, and I've been listening to X-Ray Spex practically all my life. And you can see I have an X-Ray Spex tour poster behind me that's always in my office. And I guess we should start by talking about, Polly's appearance in the punk rock scene, which, in retrospect seems kind of unexpected in a way. Her real name was Marion Joan Elliott Said, correct?
Correct.
And she's a half Somali, British person, a woman of color, and there weren't a lot of black people in punk rock at that time. Although, and in fact, in the history of British rock, there weren't a lot of people of color. So how did she come to create a punk band?
So X-Ray Spex she put X-Ray Spex together in 1976. But she was actually already performing as a solo artist under her sort of real name, Marie Elliott. And she'd released a single called Silly Billy in 1976. It was a kind of pop reggae single. But very soon after that, she, punk was just sort of starting to become something of the scene. And she happened to live in that part of London where all the punk kids were hanging out. And she saw the Sex Pistols for the first time in Hastings in 1976. And I think it all just came together for her in terms of inspiration to actually start a band, and punk was, she felt that punk would be the right kind of music to do that with.
And she was only 19 years old at the time, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So that was quite young. And
Mhm.
so you know, she started the band by placing an ad in the papers. Is that right?
That's right. The Melody Maker.
And then formed the band. And I guess they pretty quickly recorded "Oh Bondage Up Yours" after just not that many gigs.
Yeah, yeah. It was the first single, "I Bondage Up Yours," which actually didn't make it onto the album, Joan for Adolescence, because they had a one-off record deal for a singles record deal with Virgin Records, and but then they ended up signing the album with EMI.
And Paul, the title of your film with Celeste is called "I Am a Cliché," which was the B-side of "Oh Bondage Up Yours," also not on the album. Why did you decide to call the film that?
I think we wanted a title that would be, the opposite of what Polly was, because Polly's lyrics are very playful and ironic sometimes. And as we all know, or anyone that knows Polly's work, she was the opposite of the cliche. So I think, we were trying to be a bit playful. And some people would say, you should never have a negative film title. But I think after a while, any work of art moves beyond the actual words. The Beatles is a terrible name for a band on paper, but when you think of Beatles now, you don't think of insects, you think of, those four lads from Liverpool. So I think after a while, we just became the name, and the film is the film. So, yeah.
I mean, X-Ray Specs is kind of a strange name for a band too. Why did she decide to call the band X-Ray Specs? Do you know?
Yeah, she was, very much interested in, well, she had lots of interests, but she was quite fascinated with sci-fi culture, sci-fi movies, books, and also, the B movies of, the American sort of B movies, and so she had all of these influences. And X-Ray Specs, um, I think she came across an ad, for
Yeah,
the joke,
yeah, the
the joke,
glasses.
yeah, and she thought that would be a great name for a band.
She's so original, really kind of a visionary in so many ways. I think her lyrics are just so unprecedented and really the best. She was the best lyric writer of that whole scene in my opinion. The only other person that's close to her, I think, is TV Smith of the Adverts. And I just think her lyrics are better than the Clash and the Sex Pistols and the Damned and a lot of other bands that started right away in 1977. It's funny that she wrote a song called "I Am a Cliché" and she's so original. Yet in her music, she's in her lyrics, she's constantly discussing identity and originality and being a poser and being artificial. And identity is one of the main preoccupations of her writing. So, why is it, do you think, that she was so preoccupied with this question of identity and originality, and maybe didn't see herself as so unique and unprecedented?
I mean, it's a great question. I think, there is obviously a great level of awareness, self-awareness there. And I think that's quite rare in a pop star because you
Yeah,
get so caught up in the machine of stardom and popularity that I think a lot of sort of successful music artists, they might get lost in that and they lose it very quickly. They become the character, the facade that they portray. Whereas my mother, I think she was a very deep thinker and was always very aware of the whole artifice of everything that she was doing. And she, I think also her kind of humble roots, her background, her mother, very down to earth, kind of remember who you are type ethos. I think she carried that throughout. So she was always a bit of a struggle, I think, internal struggle that is reflected in the lyrics and the music.
Hmm.
people forget or don't understand, I think, that there were 3 singles from that record that were in the top 20 or 30 on the British music charts,
Mm.
which is kind of amazing. And even though the album was never released in the U.S., you talk about her creating a persona, in the film we see that, you know, she's so original. She has such original style, the way she dresses, you know, this kind of Dada inspired look that is unlike anyone else. Yet, in struggling with identity, she seems to have felt that she became trapped too quickly in this kind of pop star identity, even though it wasn't mainstream at all. Why do you think that was, or how did that happen?
I think she caught the public's imagination very quickly, for lots of reasons. I think, yes, because she was quite unique, and I think when you are that different to everyone else, that, you know, people will tend to pay attention if you're also, you know, talented and have that kind of dynamic energy that she had. So you know, people were just drawn to her, and she became the band became popular very quickly. But I think the main attraction probably for the charts, and it was that the music is very melodic, you know, for what, when we think about punk music, it's yes, it's quite, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of aggression maybe for some people, but it's also very poppy, you know. It's easy to listen to. You don't necessarily have to be a punk rock fan, I think, to enjoy the music, the musicality, and you know, there are a lot, it's just full, the whole album is full of catchy potential singles. I think Paul would agree with me there. We, you know, we've spoken about this. Every song on the album is a single.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
true, I think.
And I think you, in a different in a different reality, you know, Celeste's mum could have easily have been somebody that worked at the Brill Building or just writing songs for people. You know, she had that gift to write, you know, what Phil Spector referred to as, you know, 3-minute symphonies. And I think, you know, whether it was the kind of stuff that would be like bubblegum pop records, or, you know, it was, she was, as you said, Scott, she was probably the best songwriter of all of the punk people. I think their music went beyond punk. You know, it was pop music before it was punk.
Well, you know, it's very touching in the film when we see these childhood photos of her, you know, with, you know, before she ever had braces. She was famous, I should note, for having braces when she started singing in X-Ray Specs. And someone says in the film, I can't remember who it was now, that her day consisted of writing. Like, all she did was write lyrics all day. And we see a couple of poems that she wrote when she was younger. One is called Half Caste, and you can read the lyrics of it in your film. You know, and to me, it was almost as good as an X-Ray Specs song already. You know, I can't remember the name of the other poem we see now, though.
I want to go back to Africa, that one.
Oh yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thinking about how, you know, Polly was very concerned with identity and belonging, you know, that's something that if you are biracial, if you do have a kind of mixed heritage, as I do, as Celeste does, as Polly did, you struggle with those questions. And also, you know, what comes into it as well, I think, with Polly is that, you know, she was a woman of color, she was working class, she grew up. And Celeste told me this because I didn't know this, and we found out during the story that, you know, Polly didn't necessarily want to be working class. You know, she was someone that had an aspiration to kind of be middle class, which is something, you know, like in my family, my nan was always like that. And I think when you have those struggles with identity, it's going to come out in any art that you make. You know, not just about that struggle from when you're young, but then becoming famous. And I suppose, you know, the desire to be an artist doesn't always really gel very well with fame. They're very separate things, aren't they? But they're intertwined. And I think ultimately she was always an artist, but she didn't want to be famous, you know, and you can see why in the film what happens.
Well, in her lyrics and in the film too, it certainly comes through very strongly that she was kind of repelled by the whole idea of fame. And you know, we see her in your film in several interviews with the, you know, music press of the day. These men who don't seem to understand her at all and are kind of condescending and interrogating her about things that are trivial. And one guy even seems to imply that she should be more like Linda Ronstadt or something, which is a completely crazy person to bring up in this context. You know.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, but and I think there's more than one journalist that makes the Linda Ronstadt, comparison, which is insane.
I definitely did not expect to hear Linda Ronstadt brought up in this film. I didn't even know that people in Britain listened to Linda Ronstadt.
Well, I don't think they do anymore.
Yeah,
I guess
She's not fashionable anymore.
I guess she was a huge star at the time, and I actually hadn't heard of Linda Ronstadt before actually making the film, but then I went and kind of discovered her, and yeah, I mean, she was quite a prolific.
well, yeah. I mean, she's the
person.
opposite of Styrene. You
Yeah.
could not find someone more different in just the other end of the spectrum of popular music than her.
But a very talented lady, though. Very, very talented.
Sure, yeah, but not a revolutionary.
Yeah.
She didn't create something entirely new out of nothing. Like Styrene did. There's speaking about her lyrics some more. I wanted to talk about the themes in them beyond just identity, which are themes of consumerism, products, being a commodity, objectification, being packaged and made into something you're not. This seems to be really the great theme of her lyrics besides identity, and they're kind of intertwined in the same way. So why do you think she was so sensitive to the world of consumerism? That wasn't a subject that was really talked about very much before in music, before germ-free adolescence. I mean, maybe occasionally someone would do that, but this becomes this theme that she really, it's very pronounced, and even the point of the record in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, she I think there are lots of reasons why she became quite fascinated with this topic, and kind of going right back to her early childhood years, and just being exposed for the first time to the television, so the introduction of the television into the household. So she was already maybe 10 or 11 when they got their first television, and that was a big deal. And then she would have been exposed to the first type of the advertise I don't know, in the 60s, if there were there ads on British TV in the 60s. I don't even know. I think we had like 2 channels.
Yeah, I think ITV had started then, hadn't it? So
did it start then?
I think it's 60s. Yeah, I think so. I mean,
But
there would have been ads in, I guess.
I mean, she
mid-60s.
definitely witnessed this transition in her like childhood years, this huge transition from a society where consumerism was really in its infancy to fast forward to the early 70s, where it was really accelerating. And then I think going to the United States, so you see in the film the whole period in New York, that's when it was really, even though she was exploring these issues a little bit before going to the US, it was after going to New York that she kind of was like, she really saw kind of the full extent of consumer-driven capitalism, and that really inspired a lot of great songs that whole period.
I'm in New York, and when the pandemic started, one of the first things that I thought about were the lyrics to Germ-Free Adolescence, because of Scrub Away, Scrub Away, Scrub Away, the SR Way, which is a toothpaste brand in England, or was. But just everyone was washing their hands constantly and keeping everything clean, and scrubbing off their groceries when they brought them home from the store. It was just there's in the film, and in fact in the New York section, you guys talk about how, or maybe it's one of the people that you interviewed talks about how she could see into the future, and that just seemed really apparent when the pandemic started to me. But let's talk about the New York section of the film. So in the song "Let's Submerge," Polly already talks about New York, kind of. She mentions Richard Hell specifically in that song. And then X-Ray Specs, after they were doing well in Britain, were asked to do a residency at CBGB. So I guess that was that in 1978.
I think that was the beginning of 1978. Yeah,
Okay.
just so probably March. I think it was March 1978. Yeah.
So she and the band came here, and they played twice a night, I guess, at CBGB, and where people were very excited to see them in that scene. Not a lot of bands from London had come over yet at that time. But her encounter with New York was kind of a decisive moment in her life. Spending a week here amongst the punk rock scene at that time somehow activated this kind of oracular aspect of her personality even more, and led to kind of a breakdown. Is that right?
Yes, it was a very intense experience for her, also for the band, like quite an amazing experience, something they were really excited about initially, because it was a huge deal to sort of break America, even though it was on, it was just like, you could say it was just one kind of underground club, but that was a bit of a mecca, for UK punks as well. So playing there was a big deal. Having a residency was a big deal. But yeah, it was an overwhelming experience. So it was a period full of highs and lows, and that had a huge impact on my mother's writing. So all the songs like Genetic Engineering, Day the World Turned Day Glow, Let's Submerge. These were all songs inspired by the New York experience, probably other songs as well that I'm not aware of, but definitely those three tracks were inspired by that period.
I have kind of a trivia question about that period. Maybe one of you knows the answer. It's not very important, but I was wondering where they stayed when they were in New York. Do you know?
We don't know the actual hotel, but we know that it was off Times Square.
Okay, so they had to go all through town to get to CBGB from where they were staying.
Yeah, and it was. I know that it was a very sketchy street, and my mum told me that she heard gunshots at night, and that was like, again, something you would not expect to hear in London. So it was quite scary.
So she came back to London, and then things started to, although X-Ray Specs are doing well, things started to go poorly for her. And we see in the film the footage from the anti-Nazi concert in Victoria Park, in which she revealed that she'd shaved her head. What exactly was going on then? I mean, you have this story where she goes to visit Johnny Rotten in his apartment, and everyone kind of ignores her. I'd always heard that he kind of admired her. Was that not the case?
I think he did admire her, but I think, they were young men, they were macho, they were thoughtless, and I think sometimes men do really nasty, stupid things. And I think in that case, they were just being macho, and as Vivian Goldman says, they were horrible to her. I think he probably later looked back on it and realised that they'd been vile to her, because he has spoken highly of her as an artist and said, as far as the other punk bands were concerned, she was right up there for him. But people do stupid, horrible things when they're younger, don't they? And I think Sid Vicious was always quite a problematic character. Wearing, as some other punks did, wearing those Nazi T-shirts with the swastikas on and trying to claim that they were being, controversial or turning the symbol on its head. But if you're Jewish or, and you see something like that, then you're going to take offense at it. And I just think it was a stupid thing to do.
So after that concert, I guess that was kind of, was that the end of X-Ray Specs, would you say?
Sure. Well, not immediately after, a few months, I mean, I think everything was so intense, in terms of what they were living through. probably, you know, 1 week felt like 1 year for them. So they definitely played more gigs after Rock Against Racism. I think their last gig was actually in Paris. That's something, you know, unfortunately we had to cut, you know, certain parts of the story from the film just because we were limited to a 90-minute, you know, time restriction. And that sadly one part of the story we had to cut was the Paris fiasco, we could call it. Quite a lot went down, and that was really the end of X-Ray Specs. But the writing on the wall was definitely probably there, yeah, at the Rock Against Racism gig.
The her breakdown in the end of X-Ray Specs, you know, I mean, the film is very eventful. There's so much that happens in the film in the short period that it covers, and so many great people are interviewed. You know, the Raincoats, Vivian Goldman you mentioned, Paul Dean, who's the bass player at X-Ray Specs, who I think is the only member of the band still alive. Is that the case?
No.
No?
Well, Laura Logic.
Oh, Laura Logic, yes, of course.
Yeah, we interviewed her as well, and she's very much alive and kicking. She's got some new music out, actually, coming out soon. And yeah, there are the other members, but I'm not in touch with all the, you know, the other members of the band.
Well,
but yeah, Paul Dean definitely is, you know, still, he was fantastic to interview, and really, you know, I think Paul Sung will agree that Paul Dean was
very colourful, yeah. Yeah, really colourful. I mean, a good memory as well. He could remember all of this stuff. I mean, I think he was also very candid and very honest, and I think Laura was too, really. So although we didn't get everybody, I think the drummer with BP, did we contact him, and he wasn't up for speaking, but he's still alive, so, you know.
Oh, I was wondering about BP hurting. Yeah, he was a great drummer on that record.
Amazing drummer, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Laura Logic could also almost be a whole film herself, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, her story is just fascinating, and it's amazing that when Polly Styrene became a Hare Krishna and moved into that manor, Laura Logic was already there, I guess.
Yeah.
And, you know, they had, you know, Polly Styrene had kicked Laura Logic out of the band. Laura Logic, for people listening, was the original sax player in X-Ray Specs. And then she was replaced by Polly for reasons that I don't really understand. Do you know why that happened?
Very complicated reasons. You know, my mother would have said it was because, I mean, she told me this herself, that Laura was playing all over her vocals. But I think it was actually much more about, you know, there was jealousy, there was rivalry, which a lot of that was actually instigated from, you know, the press, the music press at the time. This, you know, there was a tendency to pit women, especially females, women, and it still happens today, pit one against the other to make some kind of cat fight competition, you know, and this was happening. I think there were a couple of journalists did some articles, some reviews where, you know, they said like Laura was the star of the show, that kind of, she's the real talent, you know, and that obviously just was not something my mum could tolerate.
Right.
So yeah, I think rivalry was, and it's very unfortunate that happened, because they were, you know, they were good friends, and they were both young girls. But again, I think the pressures of just being in that situation and having all that attention, you know, when it starts to become, you know, two people with a lot of attention, you know, there's this inevitable competition will arise, unfortunately.
It seems like they became friends again when they met inadvertently in the Hare Krishna manor. Did they maintain that friendship after they left there?
Yes. I mean, it was very difficult though, because my mum's mental health was was not good during the X-ray specs period, and later as well. So I think they were friends, and they probably had a few falling outs again, but they, of course, they were always going to be important people in each other's lives.
Well, also, of course, you were an important person in her life, and in the documentary, the film is as much about you, really, in a sense, as it is about her. It's about your relationship with her. How did you come to, or both of you together as filmmakers, come to decide that that was such an important part of the story? Was it because of your book, or was it just something separate from that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was the book, because the book was the first project that was in existence, and I think they both helped one another. I mean, one of the ideas we first had was that we wanted to revisit significant locations, and rather than use talking heads, we have disembodied voices, because we wanted people to be immersed in the past. Because if you're telling a story across multiple decades, I think it's quite important that the audience has the means to get to those points. I think if you're seeing people in the present day, if you see Vivienne Westwood as she is, or if you see Don Letz's, you forget that the testimony is kind of meant to give you that flavor of being in the past. So we knew we wanted to film in that way, and the more that the project developed, the more Celeste's role became significant, because she is the only person really that can tell this story properly and fully, because she's Polly's daughter, and because she figures in the story so much. So I think you could make all sorts of films about Polly and about X-ray specs, but I think our one was special because of Celeste and because of her lens on it. She knows the story better than anyone, and she was there. She was present at the time for a lot of it. So it worked out really well for us, I think.
Well, it's very beautiful and moving in the film, and it's great that you included that. We're getting some questions from the audience now that I'm getting here, so let's turn to those. This was for Celeste. Can you talk about how Polly chose to express herself with fashion alongside her music, especially considering how her style was so unique, even within the punk scene at the time?
Yeah, so we mentioned in the film, and a lot of people might know or might not know, that my mother actually had a shop before starting a band, and she made her own clothes, and she sold jewelry. She sold plastic jewelry, in fact, and plastic jelly shoes and things like that. It's probably where the plastic obsession with plastic actually came from. And in fact, the shop was called Polystyrene as well. So she was fashion, I think, was central to everything that she was doing right from the start. Her first job that she had when she was 15 was as a junior fashion buyer for a retailer, like quite a big retailer at the time. So she was, I think if she hadn't had taken a musical path, she would have probably developed a career in fashion. That's quite likely. So it was something she was always experimenting with throughout her life, even during the Hare Krishna period. She was like, I think part of the fun of being a Hare Krishna was just that she got to kind of wear a totally new kind of set of clothes, and what's the word?
Redefine?
Yes, like reinvent, that's it. So she was constantly reinventing herself, and I think she had the most fun with Polystyrene of X-ray specs as a character, because she was kind of styling herself. She was her own stylist. Everything she wore, she put a lot of thought into it. These weren't things that she just kind of threw on. This was she was really creating a persona, and a persona with a look. It started out, I think, more of like granny kind of chic, where she was wearing like things that old ladies would have wore, with a colorful twist. But as the music kind of developed, and through her experiences, then I think this sci-fi element became a lot more important, and the military aesthetic. So I guess, you know, as the music gets more dystopian, then the clothes she's wearing take on a little bit of that. I don't know, 1984 meets Barbarella.
Oh yeah, right. But she's not. But it's not like overly sexualized or stupid like that. It's just this completely new look.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And she's
So
very much opposed to being, you know, sexualized in terms of what she was wearing. Yeah.
someone in the film we see Polly in India, and you went to India as well, and scattered her ashes there, I guess. But someone wants to know: have you ever been to Somalia?
I haven't been. No, I haven't been, but I have to go. Obviously, you know, Somalia has been in a ongoing civil war situation basically since the 80s, and Somaliland, where my grandfather actually came from, Somaliland, which is in the north part of Somalia, which is kind of an independent country, but it's not internationally recognized as an independent country. That is a safer place. So hopefully I will be able to go to Somaliland at some point, but it's something you have to really plan, you know, and think about as a trip.
I'm sure it's not easy to get there. There's in the film we see I don't know if it's a poster or quite what it is, but I believe it's on a column on a wall that says, "In a world of Kardashians, be polystyrene." And you know, I'd never seen that before, and I was wondering where that came from and what that was.
Yeah, we wanted to know that too, because it just, I don't know whether I discovered it or Celeste discovered it, but someday it just appeared, and then we remembered it and we put it in the film. And then if anyone knows, get in touch, because, you know, we'll give you some money if you can prove that it's yours. But we just couldn't find it, and it's one of those things that someone made that at some point. But it's brilliant. Although someone took offense on Twitter and said that, you know, you shouldn't ever tell women what to do, which I of course agree with, but I think it wasn't meant to be telling women what to do. It was just saying, be more like Polly, be less like Kim Kardashian. I mean, I've never seen the Kardashians and have no desire to. It's not my sort of thing, but, you know, no offense to anyone that does.
I mean, I enjoy keeping up. You know, I've watched a few episodes of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and it's a good point. I don't think we should be pitting women against each other. But I think the sentiment of that poster, you know, that someone made is, rather than, you know, criticizing an individual like, you know, Kim Kardashian, it's more the machine again behind people like the Kardashians. But you could replace the Kardashians with any of the mega kind of starlets that are very sexualized, you know, hyper sexualized and hyper objectified, and all of these things. So I think it's more, I think the poster was, rather than saying, you know, don't be like these individual women, it's more just, you know, in this when facing an onslaught of media image, you know, when young girls especially, they face this sort of onslaught of imagery from the media about how you should look and what you need to do to yourself to be like sexually appealing. I think that's how I would take that poster, is like, no, actually we have these other role models that are less well known, but, you know, maybe you could think about being more like this person, who she turned all of that on its head, you know, and she didn't have to be sexy to be well known and acclaimed and all of those things.
It's a very anti-fashion poster, though. It shows Polly in a military helmet and her, I guess, kind of garbage bag dress. I'm not sure what the material for that dress was. So I guess, pardon me?
Was it vinyl? The thing that we've run out of now. She was ahead of her time again. You know, she knew that it was going to run out, so she got a dress made of it.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's very funny, actually. So when will I Am a Cliché be available outside of festivals in the US?
I think, is it February, something like that? I think, because it was obviously, we've done lots of festivals in that part of the world. But I think officially there'll be an announcement quite soon. But I think it was sort of February, maybe March, something like that.
Yeah. So we had our UK release in earlier this year, so it's come out already in the US, but in the UK. But in the US, you know, it took us some time to get everything in order for the United States. And we have a distributor, Utopia, and yeah, the plan is to get the film out there for audiences early 2022. On various, so you'll be able to see it in various different, you know, hopefully in cinemas, and then also on, you know, on TV or streaming, you know, so something like that. So just yeah, we get a lot of people who are, I know, quite eager in the US to watch the film, and so we just hope everyone kind of stays patient. I know it's like really frustrating that it hasn't come out yet, but very soon.
Well, I hope a lot of people get to see it in Indie Memphis. I wanted to end with there's a quote in the film that I thought was great about Polly, and I paraphrased it a little, but I can't recall who says it. Maybe you could tell me. The more she became absorbed in the dystopian futurism of the world she was creating through her lyrics, a plastic, synthetic universe where the natural world has retreated in the final triumph of everything that's fake, the more she saw into the future.
Yeah, so that's my that's from one of my part of my narration.
Right.
Celeste wrote that. She's being modest. Celeste wrote a brilliant series of what were initially letters, but then, you know, developed more into her own voiceover. She's been too modest. She wrote that brilliant piece and many other brilliant pieces.
Well, that was a great moment in the film, and it was a great summation of her of Polly's life and her achievement. So thank you very much, Paul and Celeste, for talking with us today.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for inviting us. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks so much, Paul and Celeste, and thanks so much, Scott. We love the film, and if you're watching this live, you can still come see it in Memphis tonight, or you can watch it virtually. And we want to thank again the Hohenberg Foundation, who sponsors these Indie Talks, and thanks to you all. Have a good day. Thanks again.